food for thought to let you wait. So we have three speakers. Please take your seats today. So we have Zdravko Mladenov, who is the associate partner at the McKinsey & Company. We have Mr. Thomas Müller, who is the chief executive officer at Hensoldt Sensors. And we have Alvin Salehi, who is the technology advisor for the United States government and also research associate at Harvard University. So this conversation about blessings and curses of technology really wraps up well this morning. We heard from leaders here about global values, about international order. We heard about the role of the alliance. And I think technology really has the opportunity and the potential to transform this all. Our three speakers will each speak for about 5 minutes, but I will put one question out for them that I will ask you to address when you speak, which is, what is the fundamental impact of technology on international order? How does it change the game of states, their collaboration, their competition, and where do non-state actors come in? So with that, Thomas, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Klara. I'm happy to be with you this morning. As the CEO of a defense electronics company, you said Hensoldt. Yes, we are a newly born star in Germany. One of the biggest German defense companies, but as I said, newly born star. Former Airbus part, but now as Hensoldt being independent. What we are doing? We are providing to our customers electronic solutions like radars, like optronics, but also within the spectrum dominance, we are providing electronic warfare, we are in cyber, and we are in the brain heart of future robotics. Now, first it's important to understand one thing. The future battlefield is a battlefield which is reality and which is virtual. You know, I'm an old tank man. 40 years ago, I had a tank, big iron around me, I had a cannon, I had to look and to shoot first. Today, if you look on how things are changing, it's incredible. Why incredible? Because with the virtual world, remember, Daesh has been on the internet. Daesh recruited people, soldiers in the internet. Daesh made propaganda in the internet all around the globe. And we have had hard times to cut them off again and again. On the other side, we needed to have real weapons to fight them. But where are these things are getting together? It's cyber, but it's also drones. In the future, it will be a drone with artificial intelligence. All the world is working about artificial intelligence. And things are getting together very, very quickly. If you take a swarm of drones, which is thinking, which is feeling, which is censoring what's around, passing what's in their environment, we are in face of threats which we even can't imagine today. And it's not only that we are talking about defense, we are also talking about security, and things are getting closer and closer together. Why? Imagine these drones which are thinking, pre-programmed, going to a target, to an event. Who will get them? No one. So things are getting together even faster than we expect. Now, think about cyber. Virtual world and the effect on our real world. Today we are hearing a lot about cyber attacks to some industries, even to ministers. But what's happening, ladies and gentlemen, if a cyber attack gets down 10 airplanes? Or creates a huge amount of casualties because things are not working as we usually think. What then? Is it cyber, what we have to answer, cyber attack, or is it already real war? Here things are getting together very closely. Now, in this insecure world, we need to rely on partners. No one of our countries is capable to do it on its own. And if I say no one of the 29 NATO countries is doing on its own, I include the United States. Why? Also, this big country, speaking as a German, this big country needs to have an anchor on the other side of the Atlantic. And we have realized this for 70 years, and it will be more important in the future. So the transatlantic alliance is of the essence, also talking about real and virtual battlefields. And for sure, it's not that we are talking about countries in Europe, we are talking about the European Union. As stronger we are in Europe, as better the partner to the US and to Canada in North America we are.
Thank you, Thomas. So before we move on to another speaker, I'd like to get a couple of reactions from the audience. I believe that the way we think about autonomy and artificial intelligence is impacted by how we think about ethics, trust, command and control, and all the other societal rules and the way we interact with the government and with the technology. Do you think the countries in this Euro-Atlantic space are actually disadvantaged when it comes to adoption of technology because of how we think about privacy, data, ethics, law, control? So I'd like to hear from a couple of you, what do you all think about it? All right.
Shall we answer?
So with that, I'm gonna ask you to answer this question and then address a little bit about the changing international order and technology and the role of non-state actors.
Of course. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Zdravko Mladenov. I'm an associate partner with McKinsey in London. In my previous life, I was an academic in the US and worked for the US government. Now, as a consultant for McKinsey, I spend a lot of my time serving public sector clients across the NATO countries with technology-related projects. Jumping straight into the question that Klara posed, are we disadvantaged as an alliance, as a community against, let's say, Russia and China? I think there are two ways to look at it. I wouldn't take a stand on which one we accept, but I'll pose it to you. It is fair to say that due to the nature of our democracy and due to the rule of law that we expect, also regulations like data privacy and so on, these are constraints that we deliberately impose on ourselves. These are constraints that do not necessarily exist in Russia or China, and these are constraints that make it harder for us, for example, to use surveillance at mass scale and artificial intelligence to protect our citizens. So on the one hand, you can argue that our way of life deliberately sets us at somewhat of a disadvantage. However, I think there's another way to look at this, which I personally find a lot more inspirational than just accepting that somehow we are disadvantaged. If you look back to the Cold War, in a way we were disadvantaged in exactly the same way. The Soviet Union had certain ways of working that were inaccessible to us because of the lack of a central planning system and our willingness to have a mass democracy. However, looking back, it was exactly our different ways of working that allowed us, our different ways of life that allowed us over time to compete with this centralized system, to leverage the best of our technology, no different than today, where artificial intelligence is something that the NATO alliance can harness in the way that we harness the same technologies and the same capabilities that we had back during Cold War times. So without taking a stand whether we're disadvantaged or not, Klara, I would argue that there is definitely things that we can look at the past and in the future that give us a lot of hope that we are not at a disadvantage that is going to be crucial and we can leverage what we have to take it forward. Shall I jump into non-state actors? So it's a very interesting topic because 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago, as an academic, I researched topics like the impact of national missile defense on China. which was the hot topic at the time. No different, for example, than now when we talk about automation and artificial intelligence as the new weapon of mass destruction, if you will. Similarly, I worked on the role of non-state actors in world affairs from the perspective of, could a non-state actor build a private army and invade Rwanda, for the sake of argument? At the time, that was in 1999, 2000, that was a very interesting topic. Looking today, we have exactly the same type of questions. Can a non-state actors, and non-state actors actually do, can they leverage technology in its most modern iterations for military purposes? Linking this to the topic that we have today, the blessings and curses of technology, I will focus a lot more on the curses. That is not because the blessings are not as important. It is because I believe that as a NATO alliance, we are on the cusp of capturing those blessings. If you look at, for example, we already have unmanned planes that allow for a vast transformation of the cost structure of how the military is served by the Air Force. Approximately 50 to 80% of the cost of the lifetime cost of a military plane, it can now be reduced because of the autonomous artificial intelligence and the no-pilot planes that we have. That results in having, let's call them, quality increases, such as the ability to fly faster when you don't need a human to survive the speed, the ability to do different turns that a human would not be able to endure. So both the cost, like using this example, the blessing of technology here, both the cost side of it and the capability side of it, is we are already capturing this. The challenges that we face with technology are the ones that I would argue we all collectively as a society need to spend more time thinking about. One of the challenges that is worth highlighting is that we are continuously looking for certainty and a level of understanding of what is going to happen with artificial intelligence. But the fact of the matter is, right now, we don't really know. The budget that is spent on artificial intelligence is maybe 20 to 30 million in research, a lot of it in the private sector, which I'll talk about in a second. We have machine learning that, for example, allows the militaries of NATO to survey vast amounts of data instead of using people to survey those vast amounts of data. Let's say monitor terrain or follow targets in the ocean. So we know we can do this. But at the same time, the same artificial intelligence and the same technology suffers from the inability to make a difference between a dog and a wolf. So can we really rely on this technology to make a difference between an enemy combatant and a civilian? Maybe in the future, but right now we don't know. This is reflected if you look at the projections of the entire spend of the artificial intelligence military industrial complex. It ranges from something like 600 billion in 10 years to 120-something billion, again in 10 years. That's more than 200x variation. So this tells us that one of the big challenges we have is that we deal with a huge uncertainty in terms of how we as a society are going to, how much are we going to get as a society and in terms of a NATO alliance from artificial intelligence. The second challenge that I'll highlight is the role of, as Klara said, non-state actors. Historically, the way military spending has worked is that in a very Ministry of Defense way, investment is being made in certain technology, which then trickles down into more commercial applications. If you look at the way artificial intelligence and automation in general is being driven today, the vast majority of it is coming from the actual private sector. Very different than the way, for example, 20 years ago, we designed a destroyer for the fleet and then rolled it out. Now, if you look at what China and Russia are doing, they're trying to harness commercial applications of artificial intelligence and leverage it for military purposes. The Chinese government has recently set up a project together with Baidu, which is the Chinese Google, if you will, which basically pulls together Chinese military, academics, and private sector researchers in order to jointly leverage the public and the private sector partnership for military purposes. So non-state actors are becoming increasingly more powerful in this space. They are the ones who are leading the research, and it is going to be very difficult for us to move past that point because this is the way the artificial intelligence world and the automation system is set up. The danger with this, the challenge, is that basically means this technology is commercial and it is available for sale to the highest bidder. trying to control this is very difficult, much harder than controlling sales of uranium, for example. So this is one of the big challenges that we need to deal with in terms of non-state actors. I'm conscious of time, so I will hand over to Alvin.
So before we go to Alvin, two things. One quick question to you, which is, before we can harness the benefits of the technology, I think we have to socialize what it is, what it means, what it can do. We have to have a societal conversations about the costs and the benefits. Where do you see the role of the private sector in doing it, and where do you see the role of the public sector in doing that, socializing these concepts, talking about the advantages? Just very briefly, and then we have a reaction to my first question from the audience.
I think this is a very difficult question, because to turn this around and ask you, who are the possible entities that can lead this societal conversation? On the one hand, we can say it is governments, whether it is domestic, national governments, or international organizations. Are they the ones who are able to take the lead at having this conversation with society? Historically, this has been the way NATO countries have operated for the most part. On the other hand, we have now vastly powerful private entities like Google, Facebook, that could realistically take the lead at driving this conversation under the spirit of social responsibility. Last but not least, what we see with technology is that we have a whole third set of actors, if you will, that are able to drive this conversation. Looking at this, let's say, the Me Too movement or the movement in the US to restrict gun control, these are essentially driven by independent citizens coming together, not as a government, not as a private sector organization, literally just people coming together. So if these are our three choices, governments, private sector, or individual citizens, I would argue that the entity that is still, just like historically, most likely to take the lead, but still leveraging the other two, is the public sector and the governments. The reason why is that this is a conversation that kind of transcends individual opinions. Look at data privacy, for example. Everybody has a view on how much of their data they're willing to share in order to benefit the broader implications for society in the sense of, let's say, improving our collective security. Similarly, we all want to have missiles that can target a specific enemy combatant without any collateral damage. But we differ in our understanding of, or our acceptance on how much collateral damage we'll tolerate for the additional security. So I would argue that this is not something that can be driven by the Googles and Facebooks of the world, and equally independent citizens will always differ in their perspectives. So the challenge, the mantle here has to be taken by the public sector, whether it is national governments or international organizations, but this is where the lead should come from to socialize the topic.
Thank you. Can we get a microphone here for a reaction in the first row?
Yes, I was College from Latvia. Your first question, George Orwell wrote 1984, where Big Brother was watching us. Dave Eggers has written a book called The Circle, where we're all watching each other. And we're almost compelled to do so. And in this book, the concept of privacy becomes a crime, that we're not supposed to have secrets, we're supposed to share with each other. And in a sense, we're voluntarily giving up information about ourselves. Now we're talking about trying to protect our data, and yet we want to use technology to share it. So on the one hand, the question you raise is about the moral or ethical questions, but I think it's also a psychological question that we have to answer. To what degree do we want to change our behavior using this technology, and how is it changing our behavior unknowingly?
Absolutely, especially with artificial intelligence, because whichever country will have access to more data and better data will be able to better train the algorithms, and the return on the investment from data will be much larger from the society, arguably. Yes, please. Another reaction, and then we'll move to Alvin.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I just want to add to that the concept of whether or not we have control over what we share, because we do have to have the philosophical conversation about what we're comfortable giving up and what we're not. But the question around many of the issues we're seeing with artificial intelligence, Facebook, and all of the perhaps technology inputs is really that we don't know what data and information is being compiled about us. So what's the effect of that aspect?
That's a great point. So we're going to connect a little bit Alvin's presentation to the previous conversation about the human aspect. Alvin will talk about a little bit about what are actually the blessings of technology, how they can impact human condition, and he'll share some of his personal experience.
Sure. Thank you very much, Klara. Hello, everybody. I know we're close to lunch, and I can see the energy fading a little bit. I apologize on behalf of all of us for being the last thing standing between you and lunch, but we appreciate you paying attention because it is a really important thing to talk about. I do want to say it is very special for us to be here with so many people from all around the world. This summit dialogue is not an easy thing to carry out, so I think we should probably, now that we're just about done with the first part of the morning session, give everyone who organized this session a big round of applause. So I'm Alvin Salehi. I am here in my capacity as a research affiliate at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard Law School. Also here in my capacity as a Millennium Fellow at the Atlantic Council, and we have a bunch of them here as well representing. And that program has been incredibly transformative. We all converged over the last week and a half and met with Syrian refugees and local leaders to really try to understand the incredible refugee situation that's taking place in Turkey and in Greece. And I do want to also take a quick moment to say that that experience has been very insightful, very invaluable, and it wouldn't have happened without the Atlantic Council and folks like Mr. Fred Kemp, Mr. Damon Wilson, Mr. Dan Bennett, Ms. Kate Kett, and all of the folks at the Atlantic Council who did that. So I just want to make sure that we acknowledge them and say thank you as well. So with respect to the lens of technology, the blessings and curses of technology, I also bring a perspective from my day job, which is a tech advisor for the U.S. government. I used to work at the U.S. Department of State, where I was working on expanding internet access to Africa. From there, I went to the White House under the Obama administration and worked on trying to shape domestic tech policy across the country. And in fact, I'm still there trying to help with transition. And I'm not here in my professional capacity, but I do want to share an anecdote that I think is particularly germane to the discussion that we're going to have and that we have been having here, which is a really interesting one. But in order to do that, I want you to suspend your imagination for a second and come with me to Kabul, where we, as many of us know, have a mission, a NATO-led train, advise, assist mission by the name of Operation Resolute Support, around 13,000 troops. And basically, NATO advisors are there trying to help Afghan officials rebuild their government and their infrastructure. Now, an interesting thing is that technology can play a huge role in facilitating something like this, right? The Pentagon has a few folks as part of a larger program in the U.S. government called the U.S. Digital Service. This is essentially the tech SWAT team of the government. We have folks, technologists from all around the country, come to Washington, D.C. for essentially a tour of duty in tech. These are some of the most brilliant minds that you can find coming to find out how they can give back to the country through technology. A few of these folks worked at the Pentagon as part of the Defense Digital Service. And one of them came from her cushy job in Silicon Valley, and literally 1 month into her job at the Pentagon, she was on a Black Hawk helicopter on her way to Kabul to try to find out how she could help NATO advisors solve their most pressing problems through technology. Now, the problem that they faced there, and I think this is relevant for our discussion later, was a simple one. As NATO advisors would come in to train Afghan officials, when they would leave and a new NATO advisor would come in after around a year, there wasn't a really reliable way to track the engagement. Which NATO advisor trained which Afghan official, and what did he or she train them on? So then when that NATO advisor would leave, the new NATO advisor would come and occasionally duplicate effort, which is a big waste of time and money. So these folks went in and basically created a very simple CRM platform to track all of those engagements. Spent a lot of time there on the ground trying to build something with the users, and ultimately built something that was very effective. But the thing that's interesting here comes to this theory that I have about how we can remain competitive with our allies through tech. And the theory is this, that sharing and collaboration is the key to remaining competitive in the digital age. What do I mean by that? This specific technology that they built in Afghanistan, they decided to release that software as open source software. Release it to the public, share it with others, so that others, including NATO allies, could also make this technology better, make it more secure, and use it for their own engagements. It makes a lot of sense. If we're talking about working together to be stronger with allies, then sharing and collaboration is the way to get there. Now, as I scanned the room, right when I said that, a few people looked like they were a little shocked. How is it possible to share technology as part of a NATO mission in Afghanistan and have it be secure? Isn't there classified information there? How is that okay? That is a good question, but it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding about open source software, which is that good coding practices prohibit you from actually putting data into your code. You need to keep those two things separate. For example, if I wanted to share Microsoft Word, I wouldn't give you all of the documents that I've created with Microsoft Word. I would just give you the underlying platform, and you can use it for whatever you want. Similarly here, as part of this software, all of the data is on a classified server in Afghanistan, but the actual software itself is available for other folks to use, including our NATO partners. So with that, I want you to think about this concept of sharing. And we had a question about sharing as well earlier. As we dive into this discussion a little bit more, think about this hypothesis that sharing and collaboration is indeed one of the keys to remaining competitive in the digital age. And I look forward to fleshing that further during our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So you spoke about collaboration, and before we move to the audience, the Secretary General actually spoke earlier about collaborating more with China. When it comes to technology, especially artificial intelligence in China, we mostly think about competition. We think about economic, military advantage, and we hear a lot how this country is ahead of most of us when it comes to artificial intelligence. So what would you think, the three of you or whomever from the audience, where would you think we should collaborate when it comes to artificial intelligence and China and some other countries which are not the natural collaborators necessarily, but what do you think it is where we could find the common ground for the benefit of the societies as a whole, where we can really harness the technology for all of us? So I don't know if one of you would like to react or someone from the audience, but we have a couple of more minutes before wrapping up, so please be ready to ask your questions.
Sure. So artificial intelligence is a tricky one. I think that if you ask any technologist what the future of technology holds and what one of the most important things for us to keep an eye on, it's always artificial intelligence as one of the top 5. It gets tricky because of a few things. With artificial intelligence, you have a lot of ethical and moral questions. So I'm an attorney by trade. From a legal perspective, there are a lot of things that artificial intelligence can help automate. For example, caseload. Trying to figure out exactly what cases you want to do, put that through an algorithm, have it pop it out, and there are a lot of studies that show it's actually sophisticated enough to give you something relevant. But where do you draw the line between that, which is kind of automatable tasks, and replacing a judge or a jury with an algorithm, or providing a judge with an algorithm by which he or she must abide? The thing is, when you create an algorithm that helps support something like this, usually once that algorithm is created, then everyone says, perfect, well now we can be objective because we're just going to rely on the algorithm itself. But what a lot of folks neglect to think about is that that algorithm was also programmed by a human being. So, inherently, the algorithm process is still subjective. And how do you ensure that the people who are creating those algorithms can actually remain objective so that you're ultimately fulfilling that goal of creating kind of an automatable task that is honest? As far as collaborating with other countries is concerned, I think that the global community has a real responsibility to use tech ethically. The problem is tech advances at such a rapid rate that a lot of times it's difficult to know exactly what's going to happen. So as a global community, as allies, whatever you want to call it, we have to kind of maybe think of a community set of best practices or standards every time we're thinking of rolling out something new. As far as like the bad part of AI is concerned, you have things like deep fakes. How many of you know what deep fakes are? Show of hands. Not many people. Deepfakes is essentially the opportunity to use deep learning algorithms to fake someone's image or likeness onto someone else's face. This is deeply troubling. And it has been used for nefarious purposes and very immoral things like revenge pornography or different things like this, where you have individuals' faces on others, and the technology is advancing so rapidly that it is becoming difficult to actually know whether this person is A or B. In addition to that, you actually have AI voices that sound almost identical now to any human being. These are scary things to confront. They can be used for good, but they can always be used for bad as well, and that's why it's very important for us as a global community to make sure we're approaching it responsibly.
Thank you so much. So we have 4 questions now, 5 from the audience. Also, in interest of engaging all of you, if you can keep it brief, please also feel free to make a statement and not only ask a question. Just please stand up, introduce yourself, and be brief. So with that microphone, let's start right there.
Hello, Henning Rieke, German Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin. The United States is spending a lot of money on defense, and this is a NATO question, and will try to offset Chinese, Russian developments in military terms with technological edge. Now, this is no longer called offset because that was Obama language, but there is going to be a disadvantage or an asymmetry in development and investment regarding new technologies like AI or quantum computing. How disruptive is that for NATO? Shouldn't it be a joint project such as transformation 15 years ago?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's always important within allies to share some key technologies. But to say, well, if you spend a lot of money in one country and less money in another country, I don't think it meets the point. The key issue is to be complementary. And I give you an example. We developed a passive radar. We are the only company in the world being capable to have a passive radar to a 250-kilometer extension. You cannot detect it because it's not emitting anything. It's only listening the electromagnetic spectrum which is around us. This development has been done by Germany. And to roll it out all over NATO countries is very interesting, especially if you're talking about developments on the eastern front of NATO, because we can well listen. And we have first examples where we can very, very well deploy these kind of new technologies. So I don't think that the volume of spending is driving the technology. But, and here I'm with you, Alvin, I very much like what you said about Afghanistan, to have a common platform where we can, on top of this platform, use for the best of the whole NATO what we have developed. I think this is a very good basis and a very good example. But it needs, again, to have openness on both sides, on the European side and the American side. And here we have sometimes to fight a little bit.
Thank you, Thomas. Question there in front. Can we have microphones, please?
Hello, Christine Bedsing, German Marshall Fund of the United States. I have a question here about how best to have a holistic societal approach to technology. In the West, we have advantages in creativity, in innovation. We have very efficient businesses that can develop products. But I'm more worried about the split in our societies between the fast movers and those who are being left behind than I am about competition between the West and the rest. And so my question is, whose responsibility is it to make sure that everyone is on board? Whose responsibility is it to have barbecues where we talk about NATO and we talk about what's going on in the technology space? Because only if all of our societies together are willing to go on this route and understand the data questions and how it all works, will we maintain our advantages that we inherently do have, I believe.
And before I ask you to react, I'll just say, a lot of us talk about responsibility, but in some way, technology brings individual empowerment, and some argue that it diffuses some of the responsibilities. And so it just, there's so many different facets of this, right? And I think no one knows whether we should think about it as a society, if it's a responsibility of the government, of the industry. So, please.
My feeling remains that I think this is a very good question. It's a very difficult one to answer. My feeling remains, and my thoughts, that it has to be the public sector that takes the lead, supported by private sector entities, supported by independent citizens coming together. It is forums like this one that start this conversation, and I think we need more of those. Those are organized almost by definition by either public sector domestic agencies or international ones. So, I mean, that would be my answer. The responsibility at the first instance sits still with our elected officials.
Thank you. Thomas, how do you think about the responsibility when it comes to your job and your company and your mission?
Well, first, I very much like what you said. The question you posed is very important. And you remember what the German defense minister said this morning. It's not only about defense spending, but it's also about developing countries, helping these countries to develop their own technologies. If you look at Africa currently, the speed of mobile communication and the ideas behind mobile communication, it's like if you're planting some seeds and it's going up like, we will see a lot of development in Africa in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think we have to combine the two. But on the other side, now being a real defense guy, as I said, I'm a tank man, look, there's a lot of technology we can use to support people. For example, our technology can also be deployed in securing big game parks. In South Africa, for example, there is especially one game park with 1,500 rhinos, which is secured by our technology. No one got in the last 2 years because we know what's happening. So you have two parts of defense technology. On the one side, yes, we have to fend ourselves, and also against artificial intelligence. I like this idea that we have to think about ethical questions in artificial intelligence. Sorry for this, I'm very blunt on this. Forget about it. Why? We will not have an answer. In the open democracies, we will have an answer. This is not possible, we should not do this. But sorry, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the whole world. Globally, there are a lot of people who say, well, this is an ideal tool, artificial intelligence, to give a lot of headache to these free democracies. So we have to defend ourselves also against the most ugly and awkward ideas concerning artificial intelligence. We have to prepare for this.
Thank you so much. We had one question back here, and then we're going to slowly wrap up. We'll take probably one or two more.
Good afternoon. Roger Hilton from the NATO Rapid Deployable Corps and Youth Atlantic Treaty Association. My question is for Mr. Salehi. At the moment, NATO is integrating beta programs for AI into the structures, and you have some allies who have really championed this initiative and have a real organic culture of accepting technology, where in one sense they're using, let's say, Windows XP. On the other hand, you have some other member NATO states who are still using antiquated technologies and are maybe using Windows 93. So my question is, how would you counsel either NATO or governments to bridge this interoperability gap? Thank you.
Thank you. So we have one more minute, and then I would encourage all those who could not get an opportunity to ask the question to just grab the speakers after this.
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. It's a good one. Legacy systems are very difficult to overhaul. You know, in fact, again, I'm not here to speak in my professional capacity, but this is public knowledge. The United States still has a lot of legacy systems across the federal government, and we've been working very hard to figure out the right way to fix them. In a weird way, a lot of times, the answer is usually, the easy answer is to just keep updating your legacy systems, patch them, try to maintain them. But over time, that actually ends up being a lot more expensive than overhauling them. The problem with overhauling them is you working on this IT modernization plan, essentially a revolving fund where we infuse capital up front across these agencies, billions of dollars for them to overhaul their legacy systems, implement the new ones, and then based on the money that they save, then essentially give that money back into the fund, like a working capital fund. And so what I would say is, because there are a lot of different countries trying to approach this from different ways, it's very important, going back to our original concept of opening up a dialogue and making sure we're working together. and sharing and collaborating as the key to being competitive in this digital age, for those folks to reach out to us, and for us, as we're still learning whether this is working or not, to reach out to the other countries and figure out specifically what works, what doesn't work, and be proactive about trying to make sure that these legacy systems are overhauled, because at the end of the day, it's not just money and time, but it's also cybersecurity threats. And if you're still running on very old infrastructure, your surface area for attacks is actually much larger. So it's well worth the investment and well worth the due diligence. Thank you.
So with these encouraging words, I will have to close the session, unfortunately. So please join me in thanking our panelists for their great thoughts. And please enjoy the well-deserved lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, Klara.